Some stories don't begin with a bang. They begin with a silence so thick, it crushes your chest. On the morning of April 12th, 2021, that silence fell like a shadow over the Harperwood neighborhood in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A mother's scream tore through the air, sharp, soul-wrenching, unrelenting, and with it, the curtain was pulled back on a mystery that still haunts the streets today. In a modest two-story home with blue shutters and a crooked mailbox, a locked room was found. Inside that room, there was no one. But what wasn't found was far more terrifying than what was. It was a Monday, the kind that starts with spilled cereal and missing shoes. But in the Jameson home, things were unusually still. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more intriguing stories. Now let's begin. Maria Jameson, a 32-year-old single mother of 3, had woken at 6:03 a.m., expecting to hear her children, 13-year-old Deshawn, 10-year-old Ava, and 6-year-old Micah, getting ready for school. But the house was quiet, too quiet. She checked the bedrooms. Empty, beds undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no clothes missing. The front door was still locked from the inside, the windows shut tight. Even the dog, Luna, sat trembling in the corner, her eyes fixed on the door of the storage room in the hallway, a door that should have been locked with a chain from the outside, but now hung slightly ajar. Inside that room, a single blue sneaker, a child's drawing, crumpled and torn, and a smell faint, sweet, and metallic. Maria screamed. Neighbors called the police. And that's how it began. Children don't just vanish. Not from locked homes. Not from their own beds, with dinner dishes still in the sink and homework still on the table. But in the case of the Jameson children, they did. And the room that should have held answers became the riddle itself. Before we dive into the shadows, we must understand the light. Because this isn't just a story about loss. It's a story about love. About a family that fought every day to stay whole in a world that constantly tried to splinter them. Maria Jameson was a nurse. Nights in the ER, days juggling carpools, groceries, bills, and dreams deferred. Her husband, Terrence Jameson, had died 3 years earlier in a car accident that left more questions than closure. But she carried on, and she loved her kids fiercely. Deshawn was quiet but sharp. He wrote poems and kept them folded in his shoes. Ava was fire and wonder, known to belt gospel songs at full volume in the kitchen. And Micah was just learning how to read. He still called night dark day. They were her world, and they vanished without a trace. Detectives arrived by 7:22 a.m. The scene was puzzling. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. Nothing on the security footage outside. The locked room in the hallway, a converted pantry Maria used for storage. Inside they found a faint imprint on the floor, roughly child-sized, a broken night light with scorch marks, and in the far back corner, hidden beneath a ripped duffel bag, was a scrap of paper with the words, "I hear the knock at night, but Mama never does." The door had no interior lock, but scratch marks lined the inside frame, as if something had tried to claw their way out. It didn't make sense. And in stories like these, when logic fails, the human mind turns inward. We question memory, motive, ourselves. But sometimes the truth doesn't hide in shadows. Sometimes it walks beside us in daylight, wearing a smile. The Jameson Street was the kind where people still waved from their porches. Kids played tag in the yards. Neighbors brought over gumbo when someone got sick. Especially Mr. Elroy Carter. Elroy was 59, lived alone, retired bus driver, known for handing out peppermints to the neighborhood kids, always outside, always watching. He told police he'd heard nothing that night, claimed he'd fallen asleep during a rerun of Matlock and didn't wake up until morning. But what he didn't tell them, that 3 weeks earlier, Ava had told her mom something unsettling. Mr. Elroy talks to Micah through the vents when you're at work. Maria had brushed it off as imagination. Kids say strange things. But when police questioned Elroy further, they found a detailed floor plan of the Jameson home in his garage. And more chillingly, Dozens of VHS tapes labeled only with the names of children in the neighborhood, including Deshawn. Monsters don't hide under the bed. They live down the street. They wave. They smile. And they collect secrets the way others collect stamps. Maria stopped sleeping. She stopped eating. She stared at the door of that room like it might open again, revealing her babies, yawning and hungry and whole. But that door remained still. Every sound became a trigger. A toy found under the couch sent her into sobs. The smell of peanut butter made her retch. On the 12th day, she stood on the lawn barefoot at 3 a.m., screaming into the sky. Where are they? Her sister, Tanya, moved in to care for her. But by the 17th day, Maria was no longer Maria. She began talking to her children like they were still there, lining up their shoes, pouring cereal for them, whispering through the vents. Grief is a thief. It doesn't just steal joy. It rewrites reality. And for Maria Jameson, it was beginning to erase everything else. 3 weeks after the disappearance, investigators uncovered a key piece of evidence. Inside Deshawn's locked tablet, unlocked by a tech unit of the FBI, was chilling video. Grainy, filmed in near darkness. It showed Deshawn, holding the camera up to his face, whispering, "If we don't come out, tell Mama I love her." He said the room listens. He said no one will hear us scream. Then a sudden thud, a voice, unintelligible, growling something in the background. And then nothing. The metadata showed the video was recorded from inside the locked storage room, just hours before Maria found it empty. They had been there, in that room, alive. But by the time help arrived, it was too late. The question was, where had they gone? And who had been in there with them? Forensics ran another sweep. This time, they discovered something missed in the original pass. Fingerprints belonging to none of the Jamisons. A hidden crawl space behind the drywall, leading into the basement of the abandoned house next door. A house that had been scheduled for demolition, but delayed due to permit issues. Police entered the vacant property and found what appeared to be a makeshift shelter. Blankets, cans of food, children's books, and etched into the wall in crude handwriting. She never heard the knock, but he did. The world Maria trusted had collapsed. Her neighborhood was not what it seemed. And now the house next door whispered secrets of its own. As detectives followed the crawlspace further, they stumbled across something far worse, a sealed chamber behind a false wall. Inside they found 3 pairs of shoes, a torn backpack, and the unmistakable smell of bleach. But no children, just a Polaroid taped to the wall. It showed Deshawn, Ava, and Micah, eyes wide, faces pale, standing beside a man no one recognized. But behind them, in the corner of the room, a silhouette, gaunt, watching, smiling. They were closer than anyone imagined. But someone else had been even closer. And now that someone was gone, as if they were never there. In every neighborhood, there's a house no one really talks about. Peeling paint, overgrown grass, a door that's always closed. But what if that house listens? What if it remembers? And what if the missing don't leave footprints, but echoes? The Jameson children were gone, but they had left behind something far worse than silence. A trail of shadows, a trail that led straight into the hollow heart of a home that should have been empty. The Polaroid found inside the hidden chamber was grainy, but unmistakable. Deshawn, Ava, and Micah stood in a triangle. Their faces looked drained, eyes vacant, lips taut. No blood, no bruises, but something far worse. Defeat. Standing beside them was a man, mid-40s, high cheekbones, eyes obscured by a baseball cap pulled low. He held a hand on Micah's shoulder. His fingers were long, almost skeletal. There was something unnatural in the way he smiled, as if mimicking joy rather than feeling it. Behind them, that shadow, slender, half invisible, watching. The back of the Polaroid had a single word scratched into it. Father. It was the first time investigators realized this might not be about strangers. That perhaps the monster they were hunting wasn't unknown to the children. Perhaps he was family. For months, the name Terrence Jameson had been spoken only in reverent tones. He was the devoted father, the man who died in a tragic hit and run, leaving his wife to raise 3 children alone. But that image, that word, father, it pulled back the curtain on a possibility no one wanted to face. Maria collapsed when police showed her the photo. "That's not him," she whispered. "Terrence is dead." But deep in her bones, she hesitated. Just for a moment. And that moment was enough. Investigators reopened the death file of Terrence Jameson. What they found was a mess. The coroner's report had never confirmed the body through dental records. The car had been burned so badly that visual ID was impossible, and the man driving the vehicle had never been found. But the driver had left something behind, a class ring from a high school 3 states away. And Terrence Jameson never went to that school. The death that birthed the family's grief might have been a lie, and the father they buried might never have died. In the days following the Polaroid's discovery, Maria began to hear things. Late at night, through the old air ducts and wall vents of her home, came the sound of whispers. She pressed her ear to the cool metal and held her breath. "He said if we're quiet, we live." She screamed. Tanya came running, but the voice was gone. Was it grief? A hallucination? Or had someone truly built a passage between walls? A hidden channel through which threats and manipulation had been whispered? Engineers were called in. They mapped the ventilation shafts and discovered an unauthorized, recently carved tunnel, originating from a storage room, running directly to the house next door. At some point, someone had been inside the walls, living, watching, listening. The home was not just broken, it had been hijacked. And for months, maybe years, someone had been inside, close enough to touch. While Maria tucked in her children and kissed them goodnight, he was already whispering them to sleep. From inside the crawlspace of the abandoned house, detectives recovered something small, metallic, and unsettling. A baby monitor receiver, old, dusty, but active. A scan through the Jameson house revealed its transmitter, buried deep in the baseboard behind the children's bedroom closet. It had been placed there deliberately. Detectives now believed the abductor had been monitoring the family long before the night of the disappearance, watching routines, mapping emotions, learning vulnerabilities. But for what purpose? Surveillance implies planning. Planning implies obsession. And obsession implies intent. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was a ritual. Facial recognition software failed to match the man in the Polaroid, but a retired detective recognized a chilling detail. The smile. It matched one found in an older unsolved case from Mississippi, where a family vanished without a trace in 2013. The only thing left behind, a photo, a man smiling, a shadow in the corner, the same shadow, the same type of crawlspace behind the walls, the same 3 children missing, presumed dead. The Jameson case was no longer local. It was a pattern. This wasn't the first time, and something inside those rooms had been doing this for years. Tanya found it while cleaning. Ava's journal, hidden between her mattress and the bed frame. On the inside cover, disturbing illustration, 3 stick figures in a room with no windows. One taller figure stood outside the door, drawn in red, with sharp fingers and hollow eyes. In one entry, Ava had written, "He watches us sleep. He said if we be good, Mama gets to live. He said Deshawn is the key, but Micah talks too much." In another, dated a week before the disappearance, he said when the knock comes, don't open. But Deshawn did. Now we can't leave. And the final entry, "I hope Mama never finds a red door." Children see what adults cannot. Their drawings don't lie. And David Jameson had seen something no child should. A ritual. A predator. A secret hidden behind a door no one knew existed. Investigators returned to the crawlspace. Using ground-penetrating radar, they uncovered something behind the eastern wall of the abandoned house. A reinforced door, painted red, hidden beneath layers of drywall and insulation. It was locked with a keypad. No fingerprints, no clues. Until Maria remembered something. Years ago, Deshawn had chosen a password for his gaming account. She still remembered it. Dreamer 13. They entered it. The door clicked, and behind it, an old stairwell descending into darkness. The air smelled stale, wet, as if it hadn't been opened in years. Inside, rows of VHS tapes. Names written in red marker. Children's names. And 3 beds. Child-sized. Made. Tucked in. Still warm. The children had been here. Recently. And someone had just left. As the detective scoured the room, one of them turned toward a wall lined with photographs. In the center, a new picture was pinned with a tack. It showed Maria, Tanya, 2 FBI agents, taken from across the street. From that morning, the ink was still wet. They weren't alone in the house. A sound creaked above. A door. Footsteps. Then silence. He was watching. Even now. And somewhere, the children were still alive. Or worse, only one of them was. We think we know what evil looks like. A face on the evening news. A name etched into mugshots. But sometimes, evil is faceless. It moves in silence. In the spaces between moments. In the walls of your home. And just when you think it's gone, it whispers. They swept the abandoned house 3 times. No one. Until Agent Loretta Jenkins, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and never flinched, looked up toward the crawl opening in the attic and saw a trail of dusty fingerprints leading up the hatch. They pulled the door, and there he was, naked from the waist up, skin pale and glistening with sweat, cheeks sunken, mouth open and half-smile, as if he'd been listening to them the whole time. He didn't run, didn't scream, just muttered one thing over and over. She chose Deshawn. She chose wrong. The room chose me. He was arrested without resistance. He called himself Elijah. No last name. But there was a problem. No Elijah matched his face. No fingerprints in any database. No birth certificate. No medical record. It was as if he had never existed. In the interrogation room, Elijah spoke in riddles. Calm, calculated, but not deranged. Not clinically. What he described was a system. A set of rules. He claimed he was not the first, but rather a caretaker, entrusted with maintaining the room. A place where balance had to be preserved. According to him, 3 children. 1 is chosen. 1 resists. 1 forgets. That's how it's always been. When asked who created these rules, Elijah simply smiled. You did. All of you. Every time you looked away. It's easier to believe in madness than to believe a system this cruel could be real. But in Elijah's words, there was structure, there was method, there was history. The VHS tapes found behind the red door weren't just evidence. They were confessions, a documentary of destruction. Each tape bore a name and date, some going back 20 years. They showed children confined to small rooms, given meals, books, puzzles. Always 3. Always 1 older, 1 younger, 1 middle, and always 1 child removed at the end. The tapes cut before showing what happened next, but the last 3 tapes were labeled. Deshawn Initiate, Ava Watcher, Micah Wildcard, and 1 final tape. Trial phase complete. These were not random crimes. They were experiments. Someone was studying how children fracture under fear, how long love survives in a locked room, and what it takes to make 1 child turn on the others. On the Initiate tape, Deshawn speaks directly to the camera. He's calm, but you can see it behind the eyes. Sleep deprivation, despair. He says if I help, he'll let Ava go. I just have to prove I'm strong, that I understand the rules, that I can make Micah stop. He pauses, but Micah's just a baby. He doesn't listen, and Ava's scared. A minute passes in silence before Deshawn says, what if I choose wrong? What if he never lets any of us go? Then he turns towards something off camera and says, I hear you breathing. The most terrifying sound in that room wasn't screaming. It was breathing. Steady. Calm. As if the monster was always right there. When they showed Maria and Tanya the tapes, Tanya collapsed. Maria stared. Silent. Then she said something no one expected. He's not the first one who did this. Detectives pressed her. Maria confessed something she had hidden since her own childhood. When she was 9, she and 2 cousins had disappeared for 5 days from her grandmother's home in Alabama. She told police back then they were playing hide and seek and got lost in the woods. It wasn't true. They'd been locked in a small room beneath an old shed. Only 2 of them came back. The man who had held them there, she never saw his face. But she remembered one thing. He called it a trial. It wasn't a one-time event, not a lone predator. This was a network, and Maria's family had been touched by its sickness long before her own children vanished into the same game. Elijah refused to talk more. He asked for one thing. Bring me Ava's drawing. Detectives complied. He stared at the stick figures, the red man, the locked door. Then he smiled and traced his finger over one of the smallest details, something no one had noticed. A small box under the floorboards of the drawn room. She saw what we buried. She was never supposed to. Then he scratched a set of numbers into the wall. 37.2019 to 88.6430. Coordinates. They led to an abandoned slaughterhouse 30 miles outside the city. Shuttered for decades. Locals called it the Cold Mile. One room had been found, but the Cold Mile, that might be where the others were kept. They entered just after midnight. The building creaked with memory. Rusted hooks still hung from the ceiling. The air was cold, unnaturally so. Downstairs, beneath the old freezer room, was a concrete hallway. Carved into the walls were numbers, symbols, names. Room 1, Tanya M., 1998. Room 2, Kendra R., 2003. Room 3, blank. Room 4, Ava Jameson. They opened it. The air was warm. On the bed, a single ribbon. Ava's. Next to it, a note written in a child's hand. Don't be mad. He said Deshawn needs time. I'll wait. She was alive, or had been, and wherever she went next, she believed she had a choice. They were wrong about Elijah. He wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't even the original. He was just another graduate of the system. They traced his fingerprints again, this time manually. He was taken at age 10, returned at 16. His adoptive family had reported nothing unusual except his obsession with order. The real orchestrator had never been caught, never seen, because he wasn't inside the rooms. He was outside, studying, recording, selecting, and then they found the tape labeled operator. It showed a silhouette in a glass room, surrounded by monitors, dozens of red doors, and a single shot of the Jameson home, from 5 years before the children went missing. It didn't start with the Jamisons. It started long before. The house was chosen. That night, Maria received an envelope at her doorstep. No postage, no return address. Inside, a Polaroid. Deshawn, sitting in a room, alone, older, stronger. On the back, initiate completed. Final phase begins at dawn. If you want to save them, bring her. And a second note, scribbled by hand. Micah remembers everything. One child has forgotten, one has turned, but the youngest, the one no one expected, remembers everything. And what he remembers might destroy them all. The final phase begins at dawn. That's what the note said. But what does a phase mean to a child? A countdown to pain, or the end of something they never chose to begin? The truth is, we build walls to protect our children. But sometimes the monster is already inside. Sometimes the room was never locked from the outside. Micah hadn't spoken since the rescue. Not a word, not a scream, not even a tear. But when Maria showed him the Polaroid, Deshawn's face, older now, changed. Micah did something unexpected. He walked to the corner of the room, knelt, and began tracing something into the carpet with his tiny finger. A shape, a circle inside a triangle, over and over. And then he whispered, "He's watching again." Children don't lie about shadows. They may misplace words. But fear speaks its own language. And Micah's hands spoke volumes. Using GPS metadata from the operator tape, agents triangulated the transmission source. It led them to a cold stretch of farmland, untouched since the 1970s. There, beneath an abandoned grain silo, was an elevator shaft disguised as a drainage pit. They descended. What they found was not a home, not a prison, but something colder. A school. Chalkboards, desks, diagrams, Shelves stacked with child psychology manuals, behavioral studies, and outdated security tapes marked field notes. And then, in a locked steel vault, an archive of every child ever taken. Photos, medical reports, performance evaluations, and a master file, marked, Candidate Deshaun Jameson, final phase. He wasn't just a victim. He was a subject, a child turned into a variable, in someone's cruel equation. The question wasn't where Deshaun was. It was who had he become. The door opened before dawn, and standing there, in the doorway of his mother's apartment, was Deshaun. But he didn't rush into her arms. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He stood tall, still, staring. Maria reached for him, but he took a step back, and he said, "If you come with me now, I can save Ava, but only if you remember who you were, back then." Maria froze. "What do you mean?" Deshaun looked at her, with eyes far older than his years. "You were in a room once too, weren't you, Mama?" And there it was, the piece that never fit. Maria hadn't just survived trauma. She had been conditioned, groomed to forget, and someone had selected her bloodline. Digging deeper into the archive, federal agents uncovered a chilling dossier marked Generational Experimentation, Phase Z. It documented 12 families across the country, all African American, all with histories of disappearances, mental health struggles, and sealed juvenile records. Each family had been unknowingly watched for decades. Selected. Maria's grandmother had reported visions as a child. Her aunt vanished at age 7. Her cousin drowned mysteriously in a bathtub with no water present. And Maria herself had once been called the balanced one in a trial evaluation from 1999. She had no memory of any of it. Until now. They weren't hunting strangers. They were growing subjects. The rooms weren't the end. They were only the beginning of a legacy of engineered suffering. Deshaun took them to a farmhouse in Kentucky, boarded shut with concrete and barbed wire. Below the cellar, another red door. They found Ava, alive, thin, pale, eyes glassy but alert. She didn't recognize her mother at first, but when she saw Micah, held out his hand, something shifted. She said one word, "Remember." Sometimes the soul remembers what the mind forgets. And Ava, she had waited in the dark, not just for freedom, but for truth. In a final sweep of the archive server, agents decrypted the last IP connection. It wasn't from some foreign hacker, not a faceless man in a hidden lair. It was an address in Washington, D.C., registered under a think tank called Cerebra, a private organization formerly contracted by the government in the late 1980s for behavioral control research in high-risk youth. It was shut down officially in 1991. Unofficially, it never stopped. And the founder, Dr. Gideon Morrow, a man who had disappeared 10 years ago, presumed dead. His last published paper, Adaptive Morality in Confined Juvenile Subjects. The dedication read, "To the children who listened." He created the rooms, not for punishment, but for shaping. He believed trauma could build perfect obedience. And for decades, no one stopped him. Ava, Deshaun, and Micah returned home, together. But they were not the same children. Ava sleeps with the light on. Micah draws red doors on every piece of paper. And Deshaun, he speaks to no one except his reflection. He stares into the mirror and says, "I was chosen." Therapists call it trauma bonding. Some call it survival guilt. But Maria knows it's deeper. She watches her children every night, waiting for the flicker behind their eyes. The flicker she once had. The flicker that says, "You've been there too." The locked room is gone. But what if the real prison is memory? What if these children never truly come home, because a piece of them never left? So, what do we learn from this? We learn that evil does not always look like monsters. Sometimes it looks like science, like policy, like indifference. We learn that what happens behind closed doors isn't just a cliché. It's the line between life and death for children too small to open those doors themselves. We learn that when we dismiss a child's silence, when we ignore generational trauma, when we label young black boys as troubled and young black girls as fast, or dramatic. We missed the signs, and sometimes those signs were screaming all along. The locked room was real, the missing children were real, and somewhere out there, so is the next red door. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, if it made you remember someone you forgot, then share it. Speak it, because silence is how this story survived for so long. Comment below. What would you have done if you were Maria? Like if this story opened your eyes. Share to protect someone else's child. And subscribe for more true crime stories that don't just tell you what happened, but ask you what you'll do next. Until the next red door opens. Stay awake, stay brave, stay loud.